to the post-game chat after finishing Phantom Liberty. I've had a week or two to sort of mull over everything we experienced in the expansion, and man, what a journey. What a harrowing journey, really. One that raises a lot of questions, and yeah, it's... Yeah, it was an amazing experience overall. So I just want to sort of try and break down everything I feel about the expansion. So we're going to have a little reflection on sort of the characters we've encountered, the story beats, the new things that were introduced to the game in terms of, I don't know, some of the side quest styles, some of the new gameplay mechanics, the new sort of themes. I've been making some notes, so I'll try to not repeat myself from the post-game chat from the base game. So I'll just try and focus on what was new, and then after we've had a chat about all that, we'll discuss where they could possibly go in a sequel. Because everything's... yeah, anyway, we'll get to that when we get to that. So, yeah, let's start off by having a think about the characters we've run into here, because they're like some of the main driving forces in CD Projekt Red games, right? I think it's one of their biggest strengths as a bunch of writers and the performers themselves as well. But I think it owes more to the actual script writing rather than the performances necessarily. But just how tangible the characters are that they create. So we'll start off with, I don't know, would you call Songbird the principal character? Could you call her the antagonist? It's tricky, right? I've gone a bit back and forth with Songbird in terms of I'm mimicking her posture in this picture. I guess has this been updated? No. Yeah, so I think that if you only play through the game once, I think you get a very different view on Songbird. I think that the game makes you feel a bit regretful over who you choose to side with. Obviously, they give you the choice to sort of go back on that choice as a result, right? So if you choose to betray Solomon and go with Songbird, and then you learn about how she plans to use you, she's lied to us and will ultimately betray us as well, and then so you sort of live to regret that, and you get the opportunity to go back on that choice. And then on the flip side, if you decide to betray So-Mi, you see the sort of trauma that she's put through as a result of that program that we tried to incapacitate her with backfiring, and all of the stuff she goes through with the AIs, with the rogue AIs, with the Sinishore stuff, sort of corrupting her mind. Almost, it was almost acting like a sort of like digital dementia almost that she was going through, right? Seeing parts of herself corrode and disappear. Obviously, the parallels to V were prevalent throughout. And so then that leads you to regret that as well. So neither choice, in terms of the choice itself and the consequences to the people around them, or leads you to feel a good deal of regret both ways. Outside of considering the choice based on the actual outcome of, getting saved by the NUSA and stuff, and the surgery and everything. So yeah, I've really gone back and forth with how to feel about Songbird, and I've been sort of trying to think about how they intended her to come across. Right, I think that's quite important. Is, am I maybe getting... did they succeed in First, I think I need to just say that due to the sort of spy games and the, always pretending to be someone else and everyone sort of keeping their secrets, it's been very difficult to judge or feel attached to a lot of the characters in the expansion. I think that's one of the problems when trying to discuss the characters, right? Because everyone's sort of in it for themselves most of the time. So it's difficult to articulate how to feel about Songbird, how to feel about Reed, just because it's just not straightforward, right? So I mean that is a good thing, but ultimately I think Songbird was her own worst enemy. I think that the description that we read here about her being, what was the phrase they used about her being like a ticking time bomb? I think Johnny said something along those lines, right? Yeah, anyway, she's like her own worst enemy. She's a ticking time bomb. And what I took from looking back at a lot of her memories, I didn't really sort of... I saw her memories and thought, well, she's got history of sort of betraying her friends, of getting her friends in trouble due to her own ambitions and lack of like self-control in a lot of ways. And I remember saying when we were talking to the digital projection of Somi when we were overlooking Dogtown, and she sort of reached out to our hand, it felt really manipulative, didn't it? How she was trying to say that we were like kindred spirits and we were going through the same thing. And I don't know, maybe she meant part of that, but it never stopped her from confessing the truth to us. And maybe, just coming clean a bit earlier and hoping that we would help her anyway, right? Like taking a leap of faith. But she, like when we looked back at her old boyfriend who'd help her when she went on those deep runs when she was younger, she ended up sort of not directly betraying him, but disregarding him and not considering him. She betrayed Reed and she betrayed us. She betrayed Myers. She betrayed the NUSA. She betrayed Hansen. Sort of everybody we're aware of in terms of her relationship, she has sort of stabbed in the back and screwed over. So in some ways, part of me wants to say maybe she does deserve that sort of horrible death in Sinishaw, maybe. But I definitely didn't feel like that attached to her. But I still do like my original. I don't know how to feel about my original choice. I still think that my original choice of sticking with Songbird and sending her to the moon, I feel more comfortable with that just because at least we went all in with that. We definitely got played in that sense, but we sort of washed our hands with it and got out of there. And she went to the moon, Reed died, fine, but it was like a clean... It was sort of like a clean cut-off. But yeah. I'm interested to maybe if you guys could talk to me about how you viewed Songbird. I know I've been talking to you in the comments throughout anyway about this kind of thing, but yeah, I don't know whether I was true to my own judgment of her. Is what I'm trying to say. So I articulated these concerns that I felt like she was manipulating us, that she's hiding something big from us. And when she was trying to draw those comparisons, she was definitely just trying to... It felt forced, and maybe I shouldn't have sided with her in light of that, but... Siding with Reed felt like siding with a corpse. And siding with corpse just always feels more dangerous. So I think that the best way I put it was earlier in the playthrough was... So you're always better off siding with individuals in this sort of universe, in this sort of cyberpunk universe here, because the corpse will always try to dispose of you. But I suppose the irony of that is that isn't what happened with the NUSA. They did help us. They did stick to their word. But yeah, really interesting character. A great voice performance, right? She sort of played that, you know, she was never sort of skirted too far either side of that line of sounding, you know, yeah, it was very subtle, right? She didn't sort of overdo it when she was trying to gain our trust. So yeah, it rode the line really, really well in a really interesting way. I don't think I really felt for her. I didn't feel much empathy for her for what she was going through. It felt very much like, well, you've kind of brought all this on yourself. I didn't want to blame Reed for all of it, because her character traits we saw in her memories were already well established that is what she was like. But yeah, the sort of her connection to the Black Wall, I guess you can blame like Militech and the NUSA for that. So yes, tough to say, but I think that those character traits were already well established with her. So yeah, I guess one of the big selling points for the DLC, I guess, was the presence of Idris Elba playing Solomon Reed. And he ultimately, I think Solomon cuts like quite a tragic figure in the cut quite a tragic figure in the end. Sort of whatever ending there was, he was sort of he felt like quite a melancholic figure at the end, right? Sort of desperate, like he wasn't truly believing in what he was doing anymore. And that's sort of maybe why I feel like ending up when we ended up killing him, it was probably the best thing for him. Not the best thing for him, but I feel like he'd given up in a lot of ways. And his personality sort of was always working against him, right? He was always trying to sort of move forward and bulldoze a little bit in circumstances that he just needed to sort of let go and understand that there was no repair to them. And that's, you know, he thought he could save Songbird. He refused to see the reality that taking her back to the NUS, handing her over to Myers, was just a death sentence for Songbird, or worse than a death sentence, like sending her into like slavery, essentially, like putting her in a coma and having her mind serve as a slave, essentially, right? But he gave a really good performance here. I think it was quite subtle. I think that it was him playing a spy. It was difficult to feel too close to him, and we got glimpses of his sort of ruthlessness, right, and the sort of decisions he has to make as sort of a civil servant in terms of being a spy. And everyone that we knew that knew Reed, so our conversations with Alex and with Songbird, obviously cast some sort of shadow over Reed as a person a bit, right? Because they had mixed feelings about him as well, because of the work they'd had to do together, the time that they'd lost. So yeah, he definitely ended up feeling like quite a morose figure by the end. But yeah, really interesting dynamic between him and V all the way through. And ultimately, he was a man of his word. He was, for all the sort of misdirection that we felt like he might have been throwing at us, he was pretty much true to his word. He was worthy of our trust, pretty much all the way through. He said he was going to try and help Songbird as best he could. He said he was going to offer us surgery. And he was trying to follow through on all of that. It's just the consequences of that. I think he was perhaps guilty of over-promising, right? Thinking he could save Songbird when she was beyond saving with the means that he had. Offering us a cure when really it was going to sort of cripple our ability to be the person we were. So, yeah, sort of, he had that sort of idealist mindset. that things are going to work out, that if you stick to your principles, things are going to go your way, and ultimately they don't go your way. Even if you do everything right, there are still going to be some unforeseen circumstances, and he sort of felt had throughout his life seemingly had fallen victim to that. And that was sort of his biggest flaw as a character, was his idealism. And yeah. Also, really cool performance. I don't know. I think Idris Elba's American accent sort of bounces in and out of being convincing, because I don't know. He tends to lean into being like a bit of a New York accent, right? It sort of fell out of that a little bit a few times, but yeah, great performance, awesome character, who ends up with a pretty tragic story really in the end. Sort of either dies or just becomes a shadow of his former self, chained to a desk. So then I guess we've got, who should we go for next? I mean, let's go for the big ticket, I guess. Let's go for President Myers. Awesome set piece going to rescue her at the start of the DLC. I mean, she was a very engaging character to talk to, right? Very forthright. You know, her former military background and training made her quite headstrong and demanding, and quite engaging to be around, right, in that initial sequence. But obviously we knew that sort of veneer of humanity, really, right? That we saw her there, you know, sort of being chased, hiding away. Maybe that was more like her old self, her true self, but once she regained her safety and her position of power, you know, we saw the true cold, calculating President Myers, right? Ruthless, doesn't care about the people, about other people, as if they can't benefit her and the country, right? Just completely cold and ruthless. I'm kind of surprised she survived in the game, really. I mean, I guess maybe I thought she was going to be sort of trapped in Dogtown for longer than she was, but I guess it wouldn't be that difficult to get her out. So it was kind of more realistic that she did escape earlier on. But the one thing about like the source material, I guess, is governments are very corporate. They are corps, essentially. They're bought and paid for by the corps, and that's what she feels like, right? Results oriented, sort of morals go out the window, rules by brute force, disregards the law, and all the rest of it to keep her secrets, to preserve her information. She took some massive risks, right? Because there are strict laws around in this, you know, in the Cyberpunk universe around, you know, AIs and what you do with them and interacting with them, and you know, Netwatch patrols that very tightly. So yeah, she very much risked national security with what she was doing. But I guess that ties into Militech, right? Militech were pushing things way too far, right? With Sinashore. But yeah, she was cool at the beginning, but yeah, showed her teeth towards the end, very much so. Then I guess then we got to talk about Alex. I think Alex was probably the most stripped back, or the most human character, one of the most human characters that we ran into, who I felt a lot of connection to. Because there were a lot of smoke and mirrors involved with Songbird and Reed and Myers and Hansen obviously, but yeah, I felt like she was just trying to do what she needed to do to get out and go home. That's all she really wanted, right? She just wanted her slice of happiness back and to get out, sort of. So I felt like she was the most, like, sort of human and you know, honest, sort of is what she seemed character in the game. And one of the reasons why I do prefer the Songbird Goes to the Moon ending is that Alex gets to survive, right? She gets to move to the south of France, and yeah, that's her safe. Whereas going the other way, she ends up dying under Hansen's boot, right? And really awful way for her to go out. But yeah, some really intimate moments with her at the bar. I think that sort of accentuates what this entire game did so well. You know, the closeness and the intimacy of some of the cutscenes. You know, the eye contact, how you can just sort of look wherever you want in the middle of cutscenes like that. And they're not really cutscenes, right? That's the point. They're seamless. Yeah, great character. Loved the fleck of grey in her hair as well. And I'm glad in our sort of version of events she managed to get out. And yeah, I guess we'll talk about Hansen. Yeah, as a character, obviously we don't sort of get too deeply into Hansen. He is what he is, really. There wasn't too much subtlety with Hansen. He was the evil bald guy, right? Cool cyberware, imposing figure. There was a lot of tension in that scene where we were impersonating the Cassell twins. I felt like that scene should have been a bit longer. I felt like there should have been some more moments where that could have potentially gone wrong. But yeah, he was what he was. I don't think we really sort of... I think we got that weird flashback combat sequence when we did that mission for the two soldiers. It was a bit weird, right? I guess it was meant to sort of convey how awesome in combat Hansen was, but maybe they were... I don't know, but then the boss fight with him was just like a normal human boss fight, right? So yeah, that boss fight was maybe a bit of a letdown, but I guess again the game struggles in moments with boss fights a little bit. Not all of it, but a little bit. But yeah, imposing figure, definitely. The Cassell twins were pretty cool. I mean, Aurora. I mean, Jesus Christ, she is striking. Brutal what happened to them, but they had a cool style. That whole mission, right, in the Black Sapphire, in the nightclub up top, with all the medias and all of the important figures and the corporates that were there. Yeah, it was a really cool sequence, right? Seeing Lizzie perform her song, the gambling, the drinks that were everywhere, the music, the sort of powerful figures that were scattered all around the place. All the different gangs were represented there, right? The Tigers were there, the Mayor was there, Arasaka were there. It was awesome, right? It sort of felt like a sort of microcosm of what V has gone through throughout the game, right? Where we're just sort of caught in the middle of all of these powerful people, and we're sort of like a fly on the wall, listening to all the plans of the rich and the famous and the powerful, and somehow being involved and stuck in the middle of it. And yeah, that scene sort of felt like a microcosm of that. It was really awesome. Aurora, Jesus Christ. Right, and then I guess the last character I wrote down was actually Mr. Hands. I'm sure that was a separate sub thing for... anyway. What would he be down under? I've forgotten what his actual name... Oh no, yeah, there we go. Fixes. Yeah, so we finally saw his face. I really enjoyed having a bit more back and forth with one of the fixers. Something I did want more of in the base game, sort of how like how Act 1 is with Dex, right? Because Dex is a fixer. So I would have one complaint about the gigs in the base game is that there wasn't enough drama or what's the right word? Pantomime almost around the setup of the gigs, right? I think because all the gigs had that sort of same formula where you would get near to the location and you'd get a phone call. I would have preferred it if you would have needed to meet the fixer in person, and there was some sort of physicality to the actual planning of the gig. You know, scoping out the location, collaborating with other mercenaries. You know, a net runner, a media, and so. And you know, some gigs had elements of that, but it was always had that same beginning with the phone call. It would have been nice. And I think what happened with Mr. Hands didn't happen for every gig, but you know, we got to meet him and sit down with him and plan and plot with him and interact with him and felt like we had like a living relationship, an evolving relationship with the fixer that affected sort of how he dealt with us, how he paid us, the gigs he was offering us. It just made it feel, added an extra layer of immersion to the gigs that I really appreciated. And obviously he had his own plans to become the sort of puppet master for Dogtown. And I think he succeeded in that, right? We've installed a weak, more easily manipulatable head of Barghest that he can sort of sit back and pull the strings and be the powerful one operating from his little room at the I forgot what it's called. It's not the Black Sapphire. Anyway, the Pyramid nightclub. But yeah, cool to finally see him. See his face, I guess, right? I don't know if maybe they always planned for him to be more involved in the expansion. That's why he wasn't in the main game that much. But yeah, I think that was the main suite of characters we had, right? We got loads of little introductions to characters we met in the gigs as well. But yeah, was there anyone else? Oh, okay, she's classed as she stabbed us in the back, right? Like everyone else. Yeah, so yeah, a great cast of characters. I don't know, other than a little bit with Alex, I don't really feel like we ended up getting too close to anybody in the same way that we did in the main game with characters like Panam, like Judy, like River. I guess a bit with Goro, with Kerry, with Jackie, with Vic. We already knew Vic and Jackie, I suppose, so that doesn't really count. But so I think that was one of the big differences with the DLC, was not really developing any sort of real lasting friendships due to the sort of corporate or business-like interactions we had with most of the characters, where everyone was sort of in it, had their own ulterior motives. Whereas I feel like some of the characters we ended up helping and working with in the main game, we built real human bonds with them, and that was maybe something that deliberately, I think, that the expansion sort of didn't have. It felt a bit more similar to the mission with the Voodoo Boys, where I think it had a sort of similar feeling to that, right? Where we were working with someone, but they were in it for themselves. They were using us. They tried to betray us. We betray them. And it's just sort of everyone's constantly stabbing each other in the back in that mission, right? The Netwatch agent, Placide giving us the virus, the animals who were there. Yeah, so I guess it sort of felt a bit more similar to that, whereas I think, some really deep human connections we had in the other mission, in the main game, sort of were a bit missing here. So yeah, that sort of leads on to sort of Dogtown itself. And let's find it. Yeah, there we go. Districts. Fine, not there. Sub-districts. Dogtown. Yeah, so Dogtown itself, what I wanted to say was that, as I was just saying, it felt like very isolated, and sort of this feeling of hopeless isolation in Dogtown that this sort of was its main contrast to the main game. It was very tense at all points, right? Never felt safe, never felt like there was really anyone you could trust. And I guess the one point was that this doesn't really necessarily feel like an expansion per se, because the story isn't really self-contained. Well, it is and it isn't. But it definitely feels more like an Act 4 rather than an expansion, right? So if we're just comparing it to The Witcher 3, like The Witcher 3's 2 expansions felt like self-contained stories that had little to no connection with the main game, but because of V's predicament with the relic, it was sort of inevitable that this had to feel like an addition to the main story and not like its own story. So I guess it sort of ties in. That's just a consequence of the structure of the story, the fact that there's no post-game gain state, right? There's no... You just continue playing, and I mean, The Witcher 3 was the same. There was no post-game world condition, which was a little frustrating, but you couldn't have that here due to everything that happened with the relic, right? So, yeah, the game had the DLC had some awesome set pieces, right? I think I was talking to one of you when we were doing the alternate endings, and when you side with Solomon. That version of events definitely has a lot more, not substance is the wrong word, flash to it, right? Going through the whole Sinishore facility was such a ridiculous experience, right? The AIs, the machines, the sort of corridor horror that they played with there. It's one thing that, that I've always praised CD Projekt Red for, and I wish more AAA games did this, where your choices really give you a different experience, right? I think that there's something that they teach in game development where they actually I don't think is a good thing, where they don't want to lock people out of content because of their decisions. They want people to be able to experience everything regardless of their decisions, and I don't really like that. Because it sort of makes your choices feel sort of meaningless. Whereas here, like sort of, like in The Witcher 1, in The Witcher 2, like in The Witcher 2 in particular, I'm not going to spoil anything if you haven't played it, but like in so there's a decision you make at the end of Act 1 in The Witcher 2 that determines your location for Act 2. So if you choose one way, you end up you spend all of Act 2 in this one place. If you make the other choice, you spend all of Act 2 in a completely different place. And both of those places have completely different side quests, completely different characters. Yeah. So and if you only play through that game once, you have an entire act of the game that they had to design and write and build that you will never... You probably won't see if you don't play the game for a second time. Or just reload back to Act 1. And that's similar here, right? And it should be so, like, which if you side with Songbird or Reed, you end up in completely different locations. You either end up at Orbital Air with that whole assault from the NUS forces, and the spectacle of the space shuttle taking off, and the confrontation with Reed in the rain, and the sort of showdown with our pistols. Or if you side with Solomon, you have that whole max tac assault with the help of the 6th Street goons, right? And then the whole Sinishore facility. That definitely had 2 layers to it, right? You had the whole assault on the convoy with max tac. That was one chunk. I think that was sort of comparable to the Orbital Air bit. And then you had the whole other section in Sinishore. So it definitely felt like that had a bit more in it, but that's fine, right? That is fine. They're just two, but they're so different. And yeah, I hope CD Projekt Red continue doing that, even though, like, from a resources perspective, it takes a lot of time to design these 2 sections, and a lot of players might not even play through one of them, right? So I understand from like a logistical point of view why developers wouldn't want to do that, but it gives your choices such weight when there are such large differences that in the path that you take, right? So yeah, I think that the boss fights haven't always been great. in CD Projekt Red games in general, but yeah, in Cyberpunk, not all the boss fights have really worked. But the one we had with the giant spider robot at the beginning when we were trying to save the president, that was a pretty awesome boss fight, right? It was big. It was, yeah, it felt like a proper boss fight. Whereas I guess sometimes some of the more like human-sized boss fights, yeah, I feel like the gameplay has maybe been designed from like fighting against multiple enemies. So when you end up against one really strong sort of Cyber Psycho style enemy, you feel a bit overpowered, particularly at this point when you're like level 60 and stuff. So yeah, definitely something that they need to work on, I guess. It would be the boss fights, but it is what it is. They're still fun, right? The combat's still fun, but I think that some of the more memorable encounters tend to just be with enemies rather than I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, we got to experience the new Adam Smasher fight. Jesus, that was rough. But yeah, once you get the hang of it, and from what I understand, he adapts, right? So if you're playing as like a melee character or as a tank or as a net runner, he'll adapt what he does, which is pretty awesome, right? So it'd be cool to maybe go back with other characters that I create with different builds and see how different he is. So that's pretty awesome in terms of a boss fight. They needed to do more boss fights like sort of like that, I guess. But yeah, one thing they seem to make a move towards that I wasn't necessarily a fan of here were timed decisions. I feel like most decisions we made, other than the main betray decisions, there were a lot of timed decisions. And I think I said in an earlier video in the series that, yeah, I personally don't really like timed decisions because they make you knee-jerk. And while that is realistic and immersive, it's just, I want to be able to think about it a bit more. So I hope that in future games, I don't mind if there's some of them. I just don't want every like big decision to do with characters and who I kill and stuff like that to be timed. But most of the like truly major decisions were not timed, so I guess that's fair enough. Yeah, they seemed like they made a big effort to make the gigs have more decisions and more big decisions to determine what happened at the end of the gigs. I felt like every single gig had like a character in it. Who no, these are from the main game. But yeah, like we met all these characters through the gigs, right? In Dogtown, and that didn't always happen in the main game. Some of the gigs were a bit more, oh god, Rinder. Yeah, that didn't always happen in the main game. So yeah, they definitely improved upon that. There was definitely more significant choices involved in the gigs. Well, may that continue. One thing I wasn't necessarily a fan of was the procedural content that they added. So they added there were the car theft things, and there were the supply drops assaults that you could do in Dogtown. And obviously they improved the NCPD and max stat can come down on you. I know I didn't do that in the playthrough, but I know that that's in the game. So yeah, I mean, I'm not really too fussed about that kind of stuff. I hope that they don't listen to the sort of more Grand Theft Auto focused audience who, you know, I think that those kind of players were the like biggest negative voice when the game released in terms of complaining about the game and there being nothing to do, whereas like the city was alive because of the stories it told in all of the small gigs and the points of interest, right? There was a connection to the like larger narratives throughout every single one. Like every single one of these like question marks and NCPD scanner missions, if you read the text logs and stuff that you find, the letters, the shards, it links into like really big broad stories, and that was more than enough for me. So I hope that they don't try and add too much of this sort of procedural sandbox stuff, because I just think it's kind of boring. That's not why I play games like this. I play games like this for the characters, for the immersion. And I hope they don't try and... I hope they don't listen to that sort of Grand Theft Auto crowd who want more of an immersive sim, where it's just, you know, just a game where you just go in and fuck about. I just don't think there's any substance in that. So I don't mind some of that. Some of it's fun. Some of these car missions can be fun, but yeah, I hope they stick to story, to narrative focused stuff in the open world, rather than yeah, that kind of procedural stuff, because I don't really think it works. So yeah, I wanted to pick up on some of the themes that they tapped into here. In my original post-game chat for the base game, I spoke about all the sort of themes that they touched on throughout the game that, you know, really make you think about what you're doing and consequences, and on a sort of deep philosophical level. And yeah, so I think one of the big things was the sort of AI consciousness stuff that we ran into in the Sinishore bit. And also connected with Somi and the sort of Blackwall corruption, and yeah, I guess that ties in back to the theme of existentialism that we spoke about in the original post-game chat. But yeah, about how scary those rogue AIs in Sinishore felt. Right, they felt menacing. They felt completely like not like a human at all. They felt really menacing, and that can have some big implications for future games, right? We already had this sort of interaction with what was probably an AI from Night Corp in the whole Perales questline, right? But definitely this opened another door into something much darker and less understandable, because these AIs that we ran into at Sinishore felt unknowable, right? They felt, yeah, they felt distinctly alien. They didn't feel like they were an AI that was sort of like a human, right? They felt just completely foreign, and yeah, it was a really terrifying theme, right? Tapping into the more sort of horror aspects of artificial intelligence. Yeah. One of the other big themes that came up, I guess we spoke about this a little bit when we talked about Solomon Reed, is nationalism, right? And the sort of loyalty to one's country, to the principles of that country. And it's strange because, you know, Reed's sort of feeling tied to his country, but he was in service of his country. He was sort of protecting, sort of withholding the atrocities that had been committed, right? And trying to cover up the laws that it had broken and the power it was seeking, right? So it was definitely a huge conflict. And I mean, I guess over the past sort of 10 years, you know, nationalism has become, well, I guess it always has been. Nationalism's always this sort of double-sided coin, right? On the one hand, like, nationalism has this sort of feeling of ignorance to it, in a way where you're sort of blindly aligning yourself with a flag and a nation that have done, you know, every nation on earth has done bad things, evil things. But then also at the same time, so in that sense, like, nationalism can sort of feel like a bit of an uncomfortable thing to align yourself with. But at the same time, right, like, there are principles that tie you to where you're from, and there are good things about that. So it's always this sort of double-sided coin. That definitely, in terms of Reed, definitely felt like he was struggling with, right? Like, what really was he protecting? He was protecting, like, the vested interests of Myers and of Militech in a lot of ways. But at the same time, if he was to not have protected it and try and keep the secrets and not let the world know about what they were doing with Sinishore and things of that nature, you know, it could have caused a civil war, could have caused another corporate war, right? So him covering up those secrets is a good thing in a way, because it's normal people who die during a civil war, right? So yeah, it just made me. I was just thinking about it in that sense, like the sort of both sides of the sort of nationalism thing. It's not like a black and white kind of issue. Even in a world like this, where the lines are quite clearly drawn between sort of corporations being quite evil, and the NUS kind of is a corp at this point. But even then, there are still consequences for sort of your normal person, your average person, and yeah, just an interesting topic to think about. Even in sort of a dystopic view of the future, it's tough enough to sort of contemplate the concept of nationalism in like in real life, in present day. So yeah, it just speaks to sort of the dichotomy of it, when it's not even clear in a setting as bleak as this. So yeah, that sort of leads to the theme of loyalty. And yeah, how do you really build loyalty in a world like this? Does it even really exist? I think that, we've seen with the sort of Nomad quest line and everything with Panam and Sol and the Aldecaldos, loyalty can just be a very simple thing when it's just with a sort of small group of people who feel like a family, a few hundred people. But then when you get to the sort of loyalty that was sort of pushed around with characters like Songbird, like President Myers, like with Solomon, like with Alex, it becomes a much grayer area. Yeah, because what are you being loyal to? Because is it really loyalty? Are you simply being loyal to yourself and your own selfish interests, right? And I think that this feeling permeated itself throughout the whole experience of the DLC, where it was just like you were second guessing your own decisions, weren't you? Like, well, I just need these people because they're going to help save my life. So I'm only really helping or showing any like impression of loyalty to help myself. And I didn't always feel like that in the main game. That was what was weird, was that I always felt like there was this, I've got to help myself, I've got to help myself, I've got to help myself feeling. Whereas I don't think I felt like that in the base game. So that was such a conflicting feeling all the way through. And that sort of led me to think about the theme of sacrifice. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? Like, what are we willing to sacrifice to save ourselves? What was Songbird willing to sacrifice to save herself? What was Reed willing to sacrifice for his country? And they all sort of circle together, right? As a result of Reed, willing to sacrifice something for his country, ultimately he kind of sacrificed Songbird because she had that contact with the Black Wall that ended up with the sort of corrosion of her mind. So he was, and that guilt always hung over Solomon, right? So that was his sacrifice. Somi, what was she willing to sacrifice? I mean, she was willing to sacrifice anything, really, just for her own, I don't know, what would you call it? Professional ambition, for her own technical curiosity with net running, right? She was always willing to push the boundaries to the point where everyone around her was sort of left in her wake. And that was what she was willing to sacrifice. And then our decisions ultimately came down to, were we willing to sacrifice either of these human beings for ourselves? Yeah, and that sort of idea of sacrifice always sort of pops up. Like when the Cassell twins, they get zeroed, and it's just sort of like, they're career criminals. How bad do you really have to feel? But that sort of we was always a bit of a back and forth. So yeah, those were the sort of main themes I just wanted to pick up on, sort of the AI consciousness thing, the nationalism stuff, loyalty and sacrifice. I feel like they were some big running themes throughout. Maybe you guys can tell me if you thought there were any new themes other than the ones we maybe talked about in the last post-game chat. In terms of the endings, I definitely, after sort of mulling over them a bit, rewatching them a few times, I think I like my original ending. It's, you know, Somi gets off to the moon, Solomon ends up dying, but he'd given up a bit already, to be honest. I think he'd kind of given up already. Alex lives. We piss off the president. Yeah. And definitely I was a bit cheesed off where Somi sort of left us a little trinket, and that was all she left us. After all we did. We killed like an entire army of soldiers at Orbital Air, and all she left us was like a pin and a bit of cyberware. Yeah, that stung. But yeah, I still prefer it just because I just think it's a bit cleaner. We keep our relationship with Johnny, and just the whole spectacle of the spaceship taking off and us sort of reflecting at the water side. Yeah, it just had it felt sort of right to me. Like, yeah, we've been lied to, we've been screwed over, but we got out, and we've not had to sort of deal with the devil. I mean, you could say Songbird is sort of the devil a little bit here, but yeah. In terms of like the V survives and has the relic removed and everything, it's tricky, right? I still think you should. Logically, I still don't think there's any reason why you couldn't go through the whole sequence at Mikoshi and still ring up Reed. I do think that's a bit of a logical inconsistency there. I've not tried that. Maybe you can do that. I severely doubt that. Yeah, so those are my overall feelings of Phantom Liberty. I can't wait to play through it again if I get a chance. Probably start a whole new character. Maybe I'll play through with Neve, my original V. A very brutal experience. There wasn't as much heart in it compared to some of the other things we went through in the main game, like I said, with Panam and Judy and stuff. But I guess what we went through with them was all tied to tragedy as well. And anyway, you know, what happened to Scorpion, what happened to Evelyn, what happened to Randy in the River quest line, right? A lot of tragedy was surrounding the bonding that we had with those characters. The difference was that these characters just don't hang around after the DLC, so there's no real chance to consolidate the experiences we have with them, I suppose, is maybe the main difference. So yeah, let me know what your feelings on the DLC, guys. I had a great time. They pushed the envelope. They tried to mend a few fences with, I guess, some people who were critical of the sort of early release, really, of the of the base game. You know, a bit undercooked. So they sort of tried to mend some fences, add some features in that they felt like should have been in there. Yeah, great. I've loved it. It's great. I don't think there's much you can compare it to either. I don't think you can really compare it to the Witcher expansions, just because they had a much different feeling to them than this. But yeah, so let's have a little chat about some sequels. I haven't thought about this in massive depth. I've made some notes. So in terms of the more concrete stuff that we can contemplate, it's less to do with character stuff. I think that the stuff that we can contemplate is more time period and stuff to do with the corporations. So obviously, in terms of the main game, one of the main threats and the biggest considerations was Arasaka as a corp. So in terms of a sequel, a lot of it... Now, first of all, in terms of where a sequel is going to take place, I think obviously they're probably going to just stay in Night City and they're going to do a time jump. So with them moving to a new game engine, which is... I'm already a bit apprehensive about what that's going to mean for their games. Because the Red Engine iterations over the years have always had their own flavour, their own style, and graphically have always sort of pushed the envelope, really. Maybe not in The Witcher 1, but in The Witcher 2, 3, and here in Cyberpunk. Red Engine is the versions of it has really pushed the envelope. So I'm a bit nervous about how it's going to look in Unreal Engine 4, 5, whichever. But I imagine that they're just going to move over the sort of base structure of Night City and then do a time jump so that they can sort of redecorate the place, right? Change a few buildings, but keep the solid main structure of it the same so that then they can sort of concentrate on the stories and the differences that they put into it during that time period. So I guess the question is then, are they going to go back in time or forwards in time? Because in terms of the source material, it would probably help them more to go back in time if they went into the time of the Red, or if they went back to Johnny's time. It would give them some story characters. It would give them characters and story beats that they can draw from the source material with. Whereas if they do a time jump forward, which I think is probably more likely, let's say they jump forward 10, 20 years, maybe it's Cyberpunk 2099. That sounds pretty good, right? Yeah, I think that the biggest problem they're going to have with that is that they've sort of tapped the well dry. Is that the right phrase? In terms of characters in the source material, right? They really went hell for leather, right? Johnny, Rogue, the Arasaka family. We've had lots of stuff with Militech here in the DLC. And loads of other people, all the samurai are in the game. And they're all well into their 80s at this point. I know age is a bit different here. People probably live well into their hundreds with cyberware if they're wealthy and stuff. But I think that's the biggest problem they're going to have, is there aren't really any characters left from the source material for them to insert into the game. I could be wrong about that. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the source material. I've just read a bunch of them before I played the game. So yeah, if they do a time jump forward, as we saw in that V Survives ending, they were already hinting at certain other corporations, right? So we've had Arasaka was sort of the main antagonist as a corporation here. They have their ties to sort of World War II Japan. With Saburo gone, a lot of that will have changed. They will have to commit one way or the other to, in a sequel, who is in charge, right? Who has survived? Is it Michiko? Is it Hanako? Or is it... I've forgotten the lad's name. Where are you? Arasaka Jr. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but Yorinobu. There is another Arasaka brother. He has an older brother, but I think he died, like in the time of the Red, maybe. But yeah, so it depends whether we have who's in charge of Arasaka. Is it Michiko? Is it Hanako, or is it Yorinobu, or is it Yorinobu but with Saburo's consciousness in him instead, right? Like in the Corpo ending. So they're going to have to make a decision that way. But from what that ending made it look like 2 years in the future, Arasaka had pulled back a bit from NC and had sort of gone back across the Pacific a little bit, pulled back their operations. So yeah, then in their wake, then what's been hinted at obviously is a heavier Militech presence in Night City, which is something I never thought they'd lean towards, just because Night City's always had its independence and Militech has its connections to the NUSA, right? So that's going to create a lot of tensions to do with integrating the NUSA in Night City, and does it maintain its independent status as a free city? And then obviously they were making some big connections to Zeta Tech. Is there not even a description in here for Zeta Tech? No. enough. Yeah, there's loads of other corps in here. Orbital Air, Petrochem. But the one thing I wanted to talk about quickly was... is Biotechnica not in here either? I mean, come on! Right, Biotechnica. One from like an aesthetic point of view, you know, everything in Cyberpunk's, you know, sort of very industrial, exposed metal, you know, bionic stuff. But like, what from an art design perspective, they have an interesting choice to make with Biotechnica because it's biotech. You know, stuff, you know, with things growing and you know, things like that, things that have been gene edited and things that aren't connected to sort of that typical 80s cyberpunk look of sort of, you know, exposed metal, you know, that sort of look. So I think they have a unique chance with Biotechnica to maybe lean into that. You know, on one of the radio stations where Mike is talking about the werewolves in the Badlands or something like that, to do with Biotechnica, right? Like some sort of weird experiment gone wrong. There's a film on Netflix that I constantly forget the name of, but that really leans into, it's an indie film set in a sort of post-apocalypse, and that's all to do with biotech, where it's sort of thing, you know, it's sort of a bit disgusting, but it's like, you know, you grow things and things, you know, and it's all like gooey and that sort of kind of sci-fi. It'd be cool if they sort of tried a bit of that, not to just completely use that, but just to lean into that a little bit. You know, you could probably do some cool body horror and yeah, some sort of weird augments. It's all to do with biology rather than technology. That's something I'd really love to see them lean into anyway. Just as like a portion of the story. So yeah, there's all the stuff with Night Corp and the brainwashing and all that stuff that is just terrifying that they can definitely lean into. Is the Night Corp's not even in here? What the? Obviously, they played down the NCPD with the increasing influence of Militech. We've all Netwatch is always there. Yeah, lots of corps, Petrochem. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of different elements they could go. I think that are the more obvious things. I suppose the only problem is a lot of these corps. I'd need to get the book out, but they compared to Arasaka, they don't necessarily have as captivating a figure at the head of them. But you can always rectify that, right? You can always incorporate, you know, write in a sort of CEO kind of figure. But, you know, the Arasaka family has such an interesting backstory. The sort of split factions, how long that they've lived, the sort of infighting between them, between the children and the grandchildren, all the different wives that Saburo had throughout his life, and Saburo himself. That is sort of a story within itself that makes Arasaka as interesting as it was. So they're going to have to come up with something with the other corps to make them, you know, compelling on a character level. But that's definitely, they have a lot to play with there. I think the issue that they're going to have, this is what I wanted to talk about for a sequel, was obviously they tried to sort of have a compromise in terms of the basic structure of the characters, in terms of, we have Johnny Silverhands. So you have a player-created character. You have V, right? So V feels like more of a blank slate. So they wanted to use Johnny Silverhand as a way to give some more flavor and personality to accompany you on the journey. It's not like playing as Geralt in the Witcher games, where Geralt is his own character in a lot of ways. You're playing as him, you make choices and stuff, but Geralt still feels like a character separate from yourself. So they sort of have, excuse me, Johnny there alongside you, and it just gives the game a bit more character. You've always got someone to talk to, right? So it keeps the character, the player interested all the time because you've got this like sassy arsehole in Johnny Silverhand always there to bounce off. So that bit then becomes tricky for a sequel, right? Because they can't do this kind of shit again, right? So how are you gonna, from a character writing perspective, what are they gonna do with who we play as? Are they gonna go away from the player created character thing? Because the game is very much an RPG light anyway, right? It's not like a full RPG character that you're playing as, right? You definitely make a lot of insignificant choices, but not in a true RPG sense. So are they going to move more towards that, where they're going to just give you loads more choice with how you play the game, or are they maybe going to go back to a more crafted character? Where we play as more of a legendary figure. Yeah, I think that's a really tough decision for them because they can't do this kind of thing with the relic again that gives you a reason to have someone with you all the time. So maybe they would need to change the gameplay formula to be more collaborative in the way that the actual role-playing game itself is, where, you know, doing gigs and heists and stuff involves several characters. And you know, maybe, I don't know, are they going to make it more like the actual role play where you can play as a rocker boy or a media or trauma team or all these other characters, or are they going to sort of stick to the solo power fantasy? That's the main thing I have a question over. Are they going to stick to this sort of, you know, one-man army power fantasy that we see here, or are they going to sort of maybe move it a bit more towards what the actual role-playing experience is with the tabletop game? So yeah, I think one thing that they would need to do, it's just for me, I think if you're going to have you know, a corpo star, a nomad star, a street kid star, I think they needed to do multiple different voiced protagonists. I know that that's really expensive. It takes a lot of time, and it's really difficult to get a performance that's consistent across 6 different actors. But I felt like the voice performance didn't suit certain origins, right? I felt like if you play as a corpo, you should be a bit more cleanly spoken, a bit more posh, right? Because you're living in a corporate world, right? And then if you're a nomad, you should sound a certain way. If you're a street kid, you should sound a certain way. I don't think that V's voice necessarily suited all of those backgrounds. So I feel like they should definitely consider different voices for each background. I know that would be an insane amount of work, but you know, they've made a lot of money, so I'm sure that they could pay another 4 actors to do it. And then, you know, that gives a lot of replay value, right, when it's a different voice performance. So yeah, I think that's definitely something they should consider, because like male V's voice in the corpo setting, it just doesn't sound right. Even female V's voice didn't sound right in the corpo beginning, right? They felt like street kids, right? I don't think they sounded like a nomad or a corpo. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that they could do. And yeah, I think that there are still lingering CD Projekt Red things in the game that I feel like have been problems since The Witcher 1. So the cluttered UI, I think, is still a thing. I still think that the UI is a bit cluttered. Managing the inventory is still a chore. It was a chore in The Witcher 1, The Witcher 2, The Witcher 3. It's still a chore here. And the loot system just doesn't work. I know that they drastically changed it for update 2.0 and for the expansion, but they couldn't fix it ultimately. They need to get a handle of the loot system, and I know that they tried to fix it by removing the stat bonuses from the clothes and putting it on the cyberware instead. So this was all just sort of fashion and aesthetics. Fine. But yeah, that's definitely a problem that's been in all their games. It's just too much junk, too much, you know, carry weight and stuff that just doesn't really matter, I don't think. And the upgrade systems for the guns and stuff, none of it felt, you know, you never really picked up any loot, really, and were excited about it. And I guess the problem was, after you got through like a combat encounter, you'd end up looting all the bodies. So you just end up staring at the floor, you know, picking up all the stuff, and that's just annoying. Let's be honest, isn't it, Adam? Yeah. So I'd like to see them have a major overhaul of the crafting systems, of the loot systems, because they've been janky in all of CD Projekt Red games, and it needs to change. It just needs to change, man. I love their games. They're my favorite developer, so it's just coming from someone who loves their games in spite of those things. But it's the biggest problem that they have is the loot, the inventory management. It's just always been annoying, and I've modded it out of all of their games. I modded it every time I replay that. I don't think I could play The Witcher 3 without mods for dealing with the inventory. Because it's just so much busy work. Yeah, you get the point. What else did I have? Yeah, so there's not really any predictions we can make for like the actual moment-to-moment story, because it's not going to be V, right? The next game isn't going to be about V. It's not going to involve Judy or Panam or River or Johnny or Rogue or Misty or whoever. All the other characters we've met here, Adam Smash is dead, Arasaka, so everything that's happened here is just sort of gone. So the next game is going to be its own game with its own characters. It's all going to be new. So there's not really much we can do in terms of predictions in that sense. I think in terms of the corporations, I think they've set that up a bit already. They've got Zetatech, they've got Militech, there's Night Corp lingering in the background. They could definitely do something with Biotechnica. I'd love them to do something with Biotechnica. Are they going to move away from the power fantasy? Are they going to maybe move towards more collaborative combat? Without Johnny there, are you going to have more companions with you on missions and stuff, like Jackie was, I guess, earlier on, where you maybe have 3 or 4 characters helping you do heists and missions, right? That is more true to the source material, right? Where if you're the solo, right, you'll have a netrunner helping you out with the cameras. You'll have a sniper covering you, right? You'll have a media maybe on the inside helping you out. You'll have a rocker boy, right, schmoozing and making connections, whatever, right? I don't know if they'll move that way. I don't think that they will. But yeah, that's been my experience. A few light predictions, what I'd like to do with a Cyberpunk sequel. I think that they just need to keep doing what they're doing in terms of the story writing, in terms of the character writing, because they nailed the whole vibe of the source material, and you can't really ask for much more than that. In terms of like what they should change in terms of maybe the combat or some side quest stuff or the UI and the inventory stuff, but you know, that sort of pales into insignificance compared to what they actually did well, which was the important stuff, right? Which is the tone, the characters, the writing, the choices, the consequences, the immersion, the city itself feeling just like such a real place, the tangibility of the characters. They just need to keep doing that. And then they've sort of got an open floor with where they take it, right? How big of a time jump do you think they'll do, guys? I hope they don't just do 2 years, like, you know, when we wake up and it's 2 years later and that's a bunch of changes. I hope they do a bigger time jump. I would like them to either go back to the time of the Red or move forward another, like, 30 years, 20 years, maybe in 50 years, right? Because then they can make some big changes to NC so it actually feels like a different place. And they can write a history of what's happened in the interim. But yeah, thanks for joining me on this journey, guys. I'm kind of sad that that's it for Cyberpunk. I always feel like this at the end of a CD Projekt Red game. You just feel sort of like a sense of loss. that it's over, but you know, I'm excited to play through it again with female V. Actually try and do a melee build. I don't know. I don't think I can do it, but yeah. Thanks for joining me, guys. We've had some. It's been so thought-provoking. It's some really challenging decisions. Yeah, it's been awesome. So I hope you've enjoyed Cyberpunk. I hope you've enjoyed Phantom Liberty as much as I did. Thanks for joining me on the journey. Demon's Souls is starting tomorrow. Anyway, the next video that goes up will be Demon's Souls. I've already started playing that. So yeah, thanks for joining me. Leave me a like if you enjoyed the video, guys. And just remember, everybody, never trust an on crate. I'll see you next time.